It feels like just yesterday that we got the best LLM ever made with Gemini 3 Pro Preview. It was yesterday. But that changed today because there's another great new model from OpenAI. There's actually two. The first is GPT-5.1 Codex Max. Quite a name, but it's also seemingly quite a model. It's a completely new snapshot focused on being as good as possible at agentic code, especially for long-running tasks. They also dropped GPT 5.1 Pro, which is an interesting new model that's only available through their website, but is actually very impressive, for me at least. I've even been subtweeting about it for a couple days because I was lucky enough to get early access. I didn't get early access to Codex Max. That was a very sudden drop, but I have been using GPT 5.1 Pro for a few days, and it blew me away. But there are so many gotchas to both of these models, if I'm being real. I have a lot of thoughts to share on what makes these models good and what makes them kind of weird and hard to use. As you know, OpenAI is not paying me, but someone is, and they're today's sponsor. AI's gotten pretty good at writing code, but it turns out with the right tools, it's even better at reviewing it. That's why I'm super pumped about today's sponsor, Greptile. These guys get code review. I honestly think every team should be using something like this because it saves so much time and hassle when you have a bot catching small mistakes and sometimes even big ones before you bother the rest of your team for a review. It's changed how I do code review. There's a 14-day free trial and it's not that expensive per dev, but if you're doing open source, it's entirely free, and if you're an early stage startup, it's 50% off. If you saw my previous Out with Greptile, you know I was going through a spreadsheet of examples they gave me of it being used in open source projects. I'm using a bunch of my own open source work as well, and it's catching useful stuff. But what they ended up doing, because they realized how good this was, is they made a page showing all of these examples for big open source projects like PostHog, Mastra, a bunch of NVIDIA stuff, Storybook, Raycast, and more. You can just go through and click random examples. Let's take a look at this GitHub action change. That's just the one my mouse cursor fell on. It noticed that if we run this multiple times on the same day, that the file names aren't going to be unique, which is going to cause problems if you're running this action regularly. That's a very good catch. And not only is this really quick for you to just click and fix, they also give you a prompt with AI button that you can copy the prompt from, go paste it into your IDE of choice, and now the problem's fixed. It's super customizable too. It's already going to know your code base well and use like your agentMD file and things that have changed in your repo to be smarter, but you can tune it further by saying low, medium, or high for what point it should leave a comment. Should it comment on syntax or logic style or none of the above? Should it give you the fix with AI prompt button? Should it put a header, comment? Those types of things are super easy to add in. Even the confidence scores is one of my favorite things it does. It gives you a rating on how confident it is that this PR is safe to merge. Greptile has been an incredible addition to all the code bases I've added it to, and I bet it will be in yours as well. Try them out now at soidev.link/greptile. I'm going to start with 5.1 Pro because it's the more impressive model for me. We'll get to all the Codex Max stuff in the end. So if you're not interested in models that aren't focused on coding in your editor, you can skip to the end. But I think this part's really interesting. This is the model I honestly prefer of the two. I'm going to start somewhere a little bit weird. The 2025 Gold Bug Challenge from DEF CON. If you're confused, I understand. It's a weird place for me to be going. But I attend DEF CON every year to partake in the gold bug puzzles. I genuinely really enjoy them. They are these complex puzzles that are a combination of like weird reasoning, research, and a bunch of weird crypto stuff as well. They're super hard, and all of them take a significant amount of time to solve. There are 12 to 13 of these puzzles that we get every year during DEF CON, and my team works hard to try and solve as many of them as we can in that time. I spent a lot of time on one particular puzzle at DEF CON this year, Smuggler's Manifest. And I used a lot of LLMs to try and help me find things in it that might make it easier to solve. Most of them were useless, but GPT-5 was able to give me a couple hints that were somewhat helpful. This puzzle is complex, and I don't want to waste too much time going over all the details, so the quick TLDR is we have little hints, the top and bottom here. We have to figure out how the emerald was smuggled out of the port. The answer to all of these puzzles is a 12-character phrase that is somehow pirate-related. This one was an ADF-GX cipher, so we have to combine the right set of IDs to get 24 characters. We then have to do a transform with the correct key phrase in order to get the actual contents of this phrase that we're looking for out. I would say spoilers ahead, but none of you guys are going to do this anyways, especially retroactively. It's just, this took me 3 days, okay? So there are a couple little hints in here that are notable, specifically the call out of Germans intercepting at the bottom, as well as some of the numbers don't add up. The Germans part is meant to hint that this is an ADF-GX cipher, which you can tell from all of the characters in the IDs here. And the numbers don't add up. I assumed it meant relations between the number here and the thing that was being described for the weight on this manifest. Turns out the hint it was trying to give me is that different locations don't even out with how much goes in and out. There are a handful of locations, well, 2 locations. One of them has too much weight going out and one has too much weight going in, which is meant to be an indication that that extra weight is the emerald being smuggled. Never would have figured that out. I ended up having to like reverse engineer the puzzle in a different way. Like when I tell you this puzzle drove me insane, I'm not exaggerating. I went pretty hard trying to path out everything and every path that the emerald could possibly take. I figured it out eventually, but man, this was brutal. So I decided, as a quick test of GPT 5.1 Pro, that I would ask it this problem. And you see right now, we're in a very broken state because the ChatGPT app is a disgrace. In particular, we have these 2 new chats where the title didn't update properly and is in this broken thought for 7 minutes, 38 seconds state. So I'm just going to refresh to fix it, but I wanted you to see how broken things get in this app. Like, what? Something went wrong? This is my experience using ChatGPT.com, one of the many reasons that we built and highly recommend T3 Chat. Sadly, GPT 5.1 Pro is not available in the API, so we can't support it. It never fixed the title for this one. It still thinks it's named New Chat, which is kind of hilarious to me. But I gave it the PDF and some brief instructions. Following PDF is a gold bug puzzle at DEF CON. I need to find a 12-character phrase, no spaces. Thus far, they've all been pirate-themed. What clues can you identify in the PDF? Lay out a plan to solve it. You think you can find the solution? Execute. I've solved the puzzle already. I'm testing your ability to do the same. I added this because it was trying really hard my first pass on it to be like, do you need more hints? And I'm like, I don't need hints. I want you to just do the thing. So it thought for almost 30 minutes. Yes, it actually took 30 minutes to get a response on this first pass. And the amount of thinking it did, especially if I click the thought here, it just kind of went and went and went for a while. But that's what this model's capable of. It can just keep thinking about a hard problem like this and get an answer. And honestly, this type of like looping thinking is how I felt trying for 3 days to solve this puzzle. So sorry with the clues hiding in the PDF. The cipher clue, ADFGX plus Germans intercepted. Identified correctly that it's an ADFGX cipher. No Claude model was able to figure that out when I tried them. Next point it recognized is that this is based on the movie Romancing the Stone. I read through the script for the entire movie to figure this out because I was so desperate to figure out like things that could be useful hints. Then there's the numeric clues. It noticed that most of the time the small carved box of foam lining that specifies 2.5 ounces. This one tripped me up for so long. So we have small carved foam box of foam lining 2.5, weighs 2.5. Small carved box of foam lining 2.5 ounces, weighs 2.5. Small carved box of foam lining 2.5 ounces, 2.6. That's suspicious. Yeah, that was the thing that didn't add up that I and many others got caught up on. But that's just like one small piece of the path, not as important as it might seem. And here's the thing it found that I didn't. The location weight balance. The extra cargo comes from and goes. The sum of weights in versus out for each location. The jungle in 6.7, out 8.8, net plus 2.1, and then the ports net minus 2.1. So we know the emerald weighs 2.1 ounces, grams, whatever the weight metric is. Probably ounces, just due to how it all works. Regardless, means 2.1 units of unexplained mass created in the jungle and disappeared at the port. And again, lines up with the movie. And it made a path that wasn't correct. It also noticed that there were short and long IDs. An important piece with this is that there has to be 24 characters. 4 of the paths have 3 characters. The rest are all 4 characters, which means if we use any of the 3-character paths, we have to use all of them because 24 minus 3 is 21. You can't divide that by 4. 21 minus 3 is 18, and you can't divide that by 4. You have to use all 4 of these in order to have the 12 characters you can remove and then still have 3 open paths. It's the only mathematical way to use any of these 3. So if any of those are used, all of them have to be used. And it was incorrect in assuming that the 3-character paths aren't useful. I gave it a small hint for that, though. It proposed a solution to try and figure it out, and it proposed a path that is incorrect because it's a path that only uses 4-letter IDs. But at the end here, I pointed out, for the cipher to work, the path would have to be 24 characters. What 24-character paths make sense? And it thought for 8 minutes here. So we're looking for real trade routes where the concatenated IDs are exactly 24 characters. All simple jungle to port paths that are 24 characters. You have the FGD, FXA, AFX, DAGG, EGF, variable lengths, yada yada. We found all these paths and then asked which one makes sense. And it realized that there's only one that makes sense specifically because of the bad numbers for that one box. And it was this path, FGD, FXA, XADX, AXAD. You get the idea. Found others that thought might be possible, but they are requiring the emerald to ping pong back to the jungle, which doesn't make sense with the 2.1 coming out of the jungle and disappearing at the port piece. Also, the emerald is in the jungle in the movie. So it has this path. This path took me 2 days to find, and it managed to find it in like 40 minutes. So I then said, the path looks great. Now decode it. Don't overthink the keyword. It's pretty obvious. The keyword is emerald. 7 minutes and 38 seconds later, use this path, treat it as ADFGX. It wrote code. Don't overthink the keyword. The whole story being about a stolen emerald for Cartagena pretty much screams that the key is emerald. We'll use that as a transposition key. And to be clear, when I was doing this, I just pasted the path and guessed keys in this random ADFGX decryption page until I eventually got an answer that was correct. If we keep scrolling, we get to the end here. String them together, wallet picker. I felt chills when I saw this response. This type of puzzle is not something that I expected LLMs to ever be able to do. This is the type of puzzle that I expect LLMs to help me with teeny tiny pieces of and maybe find me a hint for. This is not a puzzle I expected to be able to do. I sent a screenshot of this to some of my friends on the team after the NDAs cleared, and their responses were just as flabbergasted as me. It just didn't seem viable that a model could do this. It's so disgustingly smart. Even if it takes an hour to get to the answer, it's answering things nothing else could. But the fact that it takes so long to work, and the fact that this UI is just not built for it and bugs out in all of these terrible ways when you try to use it, makes the intelligence almost feel inaccessible. And this is where my biggest frustrations come. Not exposing this over the API and not making it accessible in other tools that can handle these long-running tasks better is frustrating, to put it lightly. It's just kind of absurd that something this smart is trapped in something this jank. There have been improvements to the ChatGPT site, but not enough for it to be something I can use reliably. I have been trying to use it more in order to get a better feel for it compared to my own app, T3 Chat. And every time I do, I go slightly more insane. But man, this model. Matt Schumer wrote a review of his own. I'll leave it linked in the description if you want to read the whole thing. But the TLDR emphasizes the point I'm trying to make here. GPT-5.1 Pro is a slow, heavyweight reasoning model. When given really tough problems, it feels smarter than anything else I've used. Instructions following is the standout. It actually does what you ask for without going off the rails. This is particularly nuts when you realize how long it goes for, that it can run for 30 minutes to an hour without breaking off the instructed path. It feels fundamentally different. More so much more so than GPT-5 Pro, which just felt like it could loop a little bit. This model feels different to use, and it sucks that it's trapped in ChatGPT.com. For serious coding, it feels less like an assistant and more like a contract engineer working from a spec, even if your spec's a bit fuzzy. I didn't try it for code work because I'm not going to do code in an AI chat app. I don't do it in mine with T3 Chat. I'm not doing it on ChatGPT either. That's not what they're for. I have tools for that on my computer. Let me use those. Front-end UX design are still far worse than Gemini 3. This is an interesting point. I find that GPT-5 and 5.1 are so far above almost everything else for UI stuff, but Gemini 3 seems to have made a meaningful leap forward even from there. Both have a similar design style and language. I honestly think they both bought training data from the same place and are just reinforced learning heavily on top of it. You get the idea though. Like, they're both pretty good, but Gemini 3 is still better, and making the model smarter does not make it better at UI. These are different, unrelated tasks. This is the part that I couldn't agree with more. The biggest weakness is the interface, as was the case with GPT-5 Pro as well. It lives in ChatGPT, not in my IDE, not wired into my existing tools. This friction is beyond limiting and frustrating. Absolutely agree. It's ridiculously smart. It genuinely feels like a better reasoner than most humans, and I expect examples within days of it solving problems that people thought were out of bounds of today's AI systems. Yes, it's already doing that. For most day-to-day work, Gemini 3 is just better. Waiting 10 minutes for an answer in a separate interface is not ideal. Yep. It's the worst part of ChatGPT and like the GPT experience as a whole right now is just the amount of time you spend waiting. The models aren't that fast. The interfaces aren't that fast. The smartest parts, like the pro models, are running in the background, taking forever. And then you have to remember that it's open. You can get the like push notification on your phone, but I find that even more annoying personally. For anything that requires deep thought, planning, and research, and anything I need to get right on first try, I reach for 5.1 Pro. Yep. The writing is good, but Gemini 3 still wins. Yep, I've been impressed with Gemini 3's writing. And his bottom line is that right now, 5.1 Pro is the best, slow, thoughtful brain I have access to. I just wish it was in my IDE. I would like to see it in an IDE as well. I am genuinely really curious how it feels to work with this model and do tasks with it. But right now, I'm using it for like my weird one-off ideas for tests, and it's blowing me away with those. But I'm also struggling to come up with more ideas. If you guys have any suggestions for things I can challenge these really smart models with when I get access to them so I can have better content in my videos, please leave a comment telling me what I can do. And while you're on the way down there, if you don't mind hitting that little red subscribe button if you haven't, helps us out a lot. You'd be amazed, like less than half of the viewers of this channel are subscribed. Might as well hit the button if you like this type of AI and developer news. Speaking of AI and developer news, I do think it's time for us to talk about Codex Max X High, GPT 5.1 Codex Max High Medium. You get the idea. This model naming stuff has gotten pretty absurd. Well, the model itself seems quite good, even though I have some skepticism that I'm sure we'll get to momentarily. We're introducing 5.1 Codex Max, our new frontier agentic coding model, available in Codex today. I'm sure this release isn't strategic based on another big LLM that came out in the last couple days. Definitely not. 5.1 Codex Max is built on an update to our foundational reasoning model, which is trained on agentic tasks across software engineering, math, research, and more. This is a really interesting thing that's happening with the training of these models. Historically, models were trained on large corpuses of data collected from whatever sources they could find to make it more likely that a token will point to the next token relatively accurately in a way that shares useful information. But it turns out having a lot of information encoded in your model isn't the make or break anymore. Most of them are smart enough in the informational sense. It's their ability to be coherent over long runs and long amounts of time as they do more complex things that there aren't examples of on the internet, like chained tool calls, where it's going back and forth over and over again, pulling information from different places, making edits, executing code, doing math, and all these types of things. The data the models were trained on before did not have any of those behaviors, but now that we've been forcing them to have those behaviors and we have endless data from all the people who have used these things now for years, we can do reinforcement learning on that data to make the model behave the way we want it to for these long-running tool calls and long-running agentic workloads. And the result seems to be pretty promising. 5.1 Codex Max is faster, more intelligent, and more token efficient at every stage of the development cycle, and a new step towards becoming a reliable coding partner. Interesting, especially because we got almost no benchmarks because we don't have API access for this either. I'm not sure if we will get API access. Simon Willison seems to think that we will. Hopefully we do. It'll be fun to play with if we do. But right now, we only have access via the Codex CLI and the Codex website, which are all different things from the Codex models. Totally not annoying. God. They specify that it's built for long-running and detailed work. It's their first model that's natively trained to operate across multiple context windows through a process called compaction. So it has compaction built in. So when it runs out of context, it will try to flatten the context and make it smaller so the important pieces are still accessible to the rest of the model, and for runs that are going longer. As it certainly needs, because I'm down to 36% context on a relatively easy change trying to update my repo to the latest AI SDK. Oh man, we're going to have to say a lot of things about that. The result of this supposedly is that it can be coherent over millions of tokens for single tasks. This unlocks project scale refactors, deep debugging sessions, and multi-hour agent loops. Oh yeah, they do say API access coming soon here. Cool, can't wait to see that and get more benchmarks. Their benchmarks are pretty promising. It looks like it's beating 5.1 Codex High and SWE Lancer by a meaningful amount, and in Terminal Bench, it seems to be crushing. Speed and cost. Codex Max shows significant improvements in token efficiency due to more effective reasoning. On SWE Bench Verified, 5.1 Codex Max with medium reasoning efforts achieved better performance than the original GPT 5.1 Codex with the same reasoning effort, while using 30% fewer thinking tokens. They're really focused on this reduction of thinking token stuff. My belief for why they're doing this is that, like, obviously it helps a lot with cost savings, but more importantly, with the complaints that the model is slow, the best thing that the people making the model can do is reduce how many tokens are coming out. If the number of tokens per second is not high enough for what they're aiming for, reducing the number of tokens can make things way faster. 30% fewer tokens means 30% faster in the end. They still recommend medium as the daily driver. That's what I use for most of my stuff when I'm using GPT models, but I have been playing with high for these tests. And we'll get to them in a second because I'm not that impressed. Here we see with high usage, it is completing with meaningfully increased accuracy and using slightly fewer tokens than 5 Codex was. Sorry, just standard 5.1 Codex. Kind of crazy that we have GPT-5 Codex, 5.1 Codex, and now 5.1 Codex Max. And then different reasoning efforts for all of them, effectively creating this weird set of models. There's like 30 plus of them. We expect the token efficiency improvements to translate to real-world savings for devs. For example, GPT-5.1 Codex Max is able to produce high-quality front-end designs with similar functionality and aesthetic, but at much lower cost than 5.1 Codex. So it was 27K thinking tokens versus 37K, 6 tool calls versus 10, and it generated 700 lines of code instead of 860. And these UIs look pretty much the same. And then the compaction, which allows it to complete tasks that would have previously failed due to long context token windows, like complex refactors and long-running agent loops, by pruning history while preserving the most important context over long horizons. It needs to do this for some reasons we'll get to. In Codex applications, 5.1 Codex Max will automatically compact a session when it approaches its context window limit, giving it a fresh context window. Interesting. This means that this is only happening in the Codex surfaces. If only they had a different name from Codex, because Codex supports this with the Codex model, doesn't really mean anything. But the Codex apps are required to get this behavior from GPT 5.1 Codex Max, suggests that it's not actually a model behavior, it's an application layer behavior, which makes sense. But interesting that they trained on this behavior, but it only works in their apps. We'll see how this goes once the API is out. They claim it can work independently for hours at a time. I have some friends that do a lot of that type of stuff, and I'm very curious what they have to say. I'll be sure to post updates if I get any information from them. In our internal evals, we've observed 5.1 Codex Max is able to work on tasks for more than 24 hours. On one hand, it's very impressive it can work that long independently and coherently. On the other hand, if it was a fast model, it would probably only be 4 or 5 hours because the model's just so slow. Like we're talking 5 to 10 times slower than Gemini 3 is. Actually, let me verify that statement. If I want Codex at like 36 TPS, Gemini 3 Pro, okay, it's only hitting like 95 TPS right now. So it's only 3x slower, roughly. Still hurts. It will persistently iterate on its implementation, fix test failures, and ultimately deliver a successful result. But how is it to actually use? This is all the marketing speak, and yeah, I was excited to try. And as you guys probably saw in my Gemini 3 video, my benchmark for testing a model's ability to update a project to the latest AI SDK has shown very interesting results across different models. So I tried this with the most up-to-date Codex CLI. It immediately started getting errors because when you have the search tool on, it fails. It appears the bug I was experiencing earlier has been fixed, which is really cool to see. The bug comes from this -- search, because unlike every other agentic CLI I know of, you have to give Codex permission to do searches. But when you gave the new model permission to do searches, it would always error, even if it didn't do a search. Parameter input 12 ID, code missing required params. I saw a lot of people dealing with this. Shout out to the team for taking this problem seriously, responding on Twitter to people who had it, and getting it addressed within like an hour or two of launch. That was really cool. Nice to see that type of agency at a company as big as OpenAI. But that doesn't mean that my initial experience was great. So I reran this without the search tool, thinking it wouldn't be able to access the web. I was kind of right, because it can access the web still, but not through a tool, at least not a tool meant for this. What it ended up doing, because again, I give it the URL for the migration guide that gives it a command to run that is a code mod that will do most of the upgrade for us. So it curls the page and gets so much content back that it actually broke my ability to scroll to what command it ran, and I have to use this transcript mode. It ended up fully filling my terminal buffer with HTML from the page that it fetched. Instead of, putting it through a tool that can extract the useful text content and put that in context instead, it put the entire HTML content of the page. Insane. So much data, which was effectively useless. And then it spent a bunch of time trying to parse the data, and ended up barely even using it. I read all the files just from running commands, ran set a few times. And again, just this gigantic pile of HTML that it was trying to read was absurd. And it's a big part of why it bloated my context as much as it did. But that's all fine if you just let it go and it gets the problem correct, right? Which is why it's so embarrassing it didn't. The first pass ran, but the results of the first pass were not what I wanted or expected. In particular, it introduced this nasty bug that I've noticed a handful of the models introduce when they don't read that page properly, where it's not persisting my arguments for the tool calls because they changed the key that these are mapped to. And it doesn't trace that properly, and then we get an error here. This should have the content of what the command it was trying to run was, and it should also persist those here as part of the results JSON. None of this data comes through because it's using the wrong keys. How is it using the wrong keys? Because it does as any everywhere it can. This model sucks so hard at TypeScript. It's insane. I have not used an OpenAI model in this year that was as bad at TypeScript as this one is. It's possible that I'm having these problems due to issues with the Codex CLI as a harness, but I can't know because I can't use the API yet. I gave it like 3 more attempts. I showed it the error. I told it what was going wrong, and it rewrote a bunch of shit and still got it wrong. And this prompt I wrote here, I think, honestly tells how I feel with my experience with Codex Max so far. You've absolutely ruined the type safety and reliability of this project. What the hell are you doing? The logs still don't work. Rethink the logic entirely and stop using as any. You are too bad at coding to be writing in such an unsafe way. Yeah, I was pissed. I cannot believe this model did this as poorly as it did. Multiple tool calls, multiple back and forth messages, multiple times of me looking over the shoulder and checking things for it, lots of hints later in. And it still had the exact same problem when it was done. Because of course it did. So I asked it, you seem incapable of fixing this. Can you write a simpler test case that logs with the same function so that we can reproduce this easier? It should be a basic test that gets the model to call a tool. So create a new file, this tool called debug.ts file, and you'll notice something. As soon as I opened it, it gets a type error. Do you know what else gets type errors? Every other file in the project. Because for some reason, despite the fact that I told it to stop writing code that isn't type safe, it never once at any point during any of these runs decided to run a type checking command to see if the types were correct or not. Since it's not in my editor, it doesn't have LSP access. So it needs to run a command to check the types, which it never did. And the result is the types were never once correct in my entire time using the model for this task. I don't know. At this point, I feel like I'm going mad. I feel like the quality of experience I've been getting using the GPT models, in particular in Codex, has been going down over the last few months, not up, which is kind of insane. Almost feels googly in this way. And this was just an absurd amount of context that it didn't need as well. All of this said, it does allegedly follow instructions well. So I want to give it one last chance. We're going to give it full access to search now that they fixed search. And I'm going to update my prompt a little bit too. Also going to update, make sure I'm on the latest codex as well. So this is the prompt. I'm going to add extra details because this model is supposedly really good at following instructions over long windows of time. And these instructions clearly aren't specific enough, even though I find them pretty specific. Man, I feel like I'm working with an Anthropic model with how much detail I have to give. So I just updated the project to make it easier to do dry runs, which lets you still run the benchmark against a real LLM, because otherwise it's effectively useless. But I did want to make it cheaper and faster to run so that it's hopefully going to be able, fingers crossed, to figure these things out a little bit more effectively and efficiently. So let's tell it about all of these things. Test your implementation by running the following command. Bun, run, dry, run. Something I've learned about writing really long prompts is that I hate typing them. Thankful for Whisperflow for making it a little easier to speak them. So let's speak this together. Each test should have a result written to the /results/dry run directory. Make sure you validate these outputs and that the tool calls that they have do include the parameters that were passed by the model. I've had a problem where the output ends up being empty objects instead of the expected output of what the model submitted in the tool call. I got that wrong with the dash. That's fine. God, the outputs are so good. I actually really like Whisperflow. Spoiler, they're going to be sponsoring some stuff in the future because I like them so much that I've harassed them into becoming a sponsor. Been using it since my hand injury. It's been great. Also make sure that all of the TypeScript in the project is validated. We don't want to be shipping any unsafe code in this project. Please avoid using any and any other things that might break the type safety of the system, and make sure you validate the changes that you make using TSC. You know, we'll even give it a TypeScript command. Oh, the no emit, sure. We now have our much better prompt. Let's give this one last go. Paste. Pasted content, thanks. Fingers crossed. Quick interruption. I'm amused that it keeps calling bunx npm view for some reason. Just silly thing I noticed, wanted to make fun of quick. I'm sure this won't take a long time at all.
2 hours later.
It hasn't actually been 2 hours, but 11 and a half minutes later, according to my phone, we finally have it done. And yeah, it wasn't able to run the dry run because its attempts were hitting network errors because they run the commands in a sandbox that has network access restricted. I'll try it again with network access later, but I want to see if it worked first. Bun, run, dry run. Let's see if it's able to finally get the correct results after building a whole new harness and rewriting the entire prompt and adding 3x more context in hopes that it might be able to get it right. And then waiting 12 minutes. Will it work? We did it, Reddit. Correct results. This appears to behave now that I've given it way too much additional help. So yeah, if you're also having a bad experience with Codex Max, overthink the instructions. Pretend that a new developer is contributing to your code base and give them all the hints that they might need, because this model does need it. It really seems to struggle without this type of hand-holding. But if you do hold its hand a little bit and eat all of the weird things like network errors that will happen throughout, you might actually eventually get it to do the right thing. Supposedly. I haven't even read the code yet. You know what? I just did a quick audit of the code. It's good. It wrote good code. Credit where it's due. The results of this are good. But man, if you learn anything from this, it should be that if you're using these long-running smart models, give them really strict instructions. Make sure anything that they should be doing during their work is specified. Normally, I try to only specify what the input and output should be. Like, this is how it should work when it's done. This is what you should do. Not, here is how you check your work along the way. But these models need assistance to stay on track. And if you're not going to be constantly reminding it, like, hey, make sure you do this way, because you want to let it run for 20 minutes to multiple hours itself, you need to give it the right pieces, the right harnesses, the right tools, and the right instructions to let it keep going for that long. I'm going to try to continue prompting in this very different, weird way in hopes, fingers crossed, that it will behave how we all would want it to. And I'll be sure to keep talking about this going forward in other videos if I do have a better experience than I had previously with this. Hopefully, we're now at the end of me doing this AI SDK v5 upgrade, and I'm really excited for v6 to drop so I can do it all again. Seriously though, what do you guys think about these models? I know the names are a mess, but are you getting good experiences with them, or are you just as frustrated as me that we don't have API access? Let me know, and until next time, peace nerds.